For 20 years, the press has made David Bossie appear to be an enemy of the Clintons. Now that Donald Trump has hired Bossie to be his deputy campaign manager, the press is building Bossie up as the ultimate Clinton hater who has spent decades trying to destroy the Clintons. Consistent with that theme, John Podesta, chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign, issued a statement saying, quote, "David Bossie is so craven and maniacal that in the heyday of the overreaching Gingrich-era Congress, the top Whitewater conspiracy theorist of the House had to fire him for doctoring evidence. He has devoted his career ever since to tearing down Hillary Clinton," unquote. In March of 1996, Bossie called Reed Irvine, chairman of Accuracy in Media, to tell him about James Stewart's new book, Bloodsport.
There's this book coming out next week.
Stewart?
Yeah. It's going to be devastating.
Is that so?
Yeah. Devastating.
Have you seen advance copies? Or?
I have not. I worked with Stewart a lot on putting it together. A lot, actually.
The intellectually challenged Bossie apparently did not understand that James Stewart's book defends the Clintons and vilifies Bossie, presenting him as a disreputable character. It is hardly plausible that Stewart, a Harvard Law graduate and Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist, would need a lot of help from Bossie, a college dropout. Taking Bossie's assertions at face value, it is also extremely curious, to say the least, that the author of a book that resoundingly defends the Clintons should enlist the assistance of a man painted by the press as virtually the ultimate Clinton hater. Bossie called Reed Irvine again after Stewart's book was released. Playing the role of the false critic can get confusing for a man as unqualified as Bossie. The supposed Clinton enemy takes the position of Hillary's close friend and advisor Susan Thomas's and the Clinton defender James Stewart by blaming Vince Foster's wife for driving Foster to kill himself.
Who says that he was on the outs with Hillary. His relationship with Hillary had been demolished in the few months prior to his death, or maybe even up to 6 months, but since they basically took office in January. And then his wife was a huge burden on him. From what I've learned, he dreaded the time when she was going to come up here, meaning she was down in Little Rock. He was doing okay without her around, and then all of a sudden she shows up on the scene, as you know, sometime in the spring, and then he goes downhill because she's like an albatross around his neck.
Oh, in what sense?
Because she was overburdening him. He couldn't deal with her being such a clinging, burdening person in his life when he needed somebody to be more of a support because he was having such trouble in the other areas of his life. His wife ended up being a bigger burden on him than.
Can you give me an idea of? I mean, this is a pretty intimate sort of thing. I mean, what is the source for this? I mean, let me say that I go back to an old story about Beau Brummel, who had a beautiful wife, and he divorced her. And his friend said, "Oh, why? She's such a lovely, beautiful girl. Why did you divorce her?" He says, "I'm wearing a new pair of boots. Can any of you tell me where they pinch?" And usually things like that. I mean, take somebody that this guy. Everybody that I read says he didn't confide in anybody. Well, or very few people that he confided in. His secretary thought, well, he confided in Lisa.
No, he confided in Susan Thomas's. I can tell you that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Because I've read things that they had conversations.
Well, she says they had one. That's what it is. Actually, she's obviously, she either lied to the FBI or she's lying to James Stewart.
Well, I would put my money more on her lying to the FBI.
Really?
That's why we're bringing her back. We're not bringing her back because she lied to James Stewart. We don't really give a shit if she did that. We care because there's a contradiction, and we want to know. She conveniently remembers things, not just about Vince Foster, but about the campaign, even more importantly to me, the campaign activities of what they did to counteract Whitewater, and her recollection of what she did with Hillary is much different in the book than it is in her deposition, or in her FBI 302s, or in the hearings.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so I mean that's a very major point.
Yeah, okay, I wouldn't disagree with that. But tell me, is there somebody that confirms what she says to Stewart about Lisa?
Is there somebody who confirms it?
Yeah,
I mean there's nobody else there. I mean I don't understand what you mean.
I mean, is there somebody else that has said essentially the same thing about the Foster-Lisa relationship?
Oh, absolutely.
Like who?
I will. I don't know if I could tell you, but I will see if I can tell you, and then I'll call you back.
Okay.
I mean, that's, I'll check and I'll get back to you.
I don't find in any of the everything that I've read in all of these 302s indicates that the friends thought they had claiming that they had a good relationship. Now, of course, I believe that he was. I'm prepared to believe that is not necessarily true, because I guess I'm satisfied that he did have a close relationship with Hillary.
Right, oh, absolutely.
But and
that was definitely on the rocks.
But as I said, my secretary, when she read the stuff that Susan Thomas had to say, said, I'll bet she got that from Hillary. And I said, that rings a bell. That's precisely what a guy that's got a girlfriend tells his girlfriend about his marriage.
There's no doubt about it. Absolutely, I agree with that. I agree that he probably told Hillary, and Hillary and Susan probably had conversations about it. Whether Vince told Susan Thomas's directly...
Pause for a moment to reflect on what was just said. Read Irvine's secretary. On reading what Susan Thomas's told Stewart, suspected Thomas's got the story from Hillary, that Foster's wife Lisa drove him to kill himself. According to Stewart, he wrote Bloodsport in defense of the Clintons after he met with Hillary Clinton at the White House. That meeting was arranged by Susan Thomas's. The passage being discussed by Bossie and Irvine is on page 284. According to Thomas's, Vince told her he wanted to talk to her privately, away from work where, quote, they wouldn't be seen, unquote. She says they met at an upscale rooming house at 2020 O Street, where Thomas's had a room. Stewart wrote, when Foster arrived that evening, Thomas's thought he looked a little better. He looked around the house and seemed amused by the garish Victorian decor. He mentioned that he and Lisa were going away for the weekend, but then he began to unburden himself. He mentioned how overworked he was and how he lacked the time and the support staff he was used to in Little Rock, and he indicated he was homesick, not just for Little Rock, but for the quieter, predictable life he had there. But then the conversation took a curious turn. One thing he had not missed about his life in Little Rock was Lisa, his wife. The marriage had not been what he had hoped for, and it hadn't been for years. He had to make all the decisions in the family. She was completely dependent on him, and this had become a burden. He found he couldn't confide in her. Lisa's recent arrival in Washington had brought this to the fore just when Foster needed someone to lean on. Thomas's didn't know what to say. Foster seemed calm, dignified, but infinitely sad. End quote. Let's return to Bossie and Irvine's conversation.
I agree that he probably told Hillary, and Hillary and Susan probably had conversations about it. Whether Vince told Susan Thomas's directly...
Would you confide in Susan Thomas's?
If I was Vince Foster?
If you were anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to think about their relationship. I mean, they were all a little tight-knit band of...
Susan Thomas's, she said she saw him a couple of times a year.
Oh, yeah, but they hung out in Little... You got to remember, during the campaign, they all basically lived together, if you will.
Not Foster. I mean, he wasn't part of the campaign.
Oh, he wasn't an official part of the campaign, but he most certainly took part in it, and he was always around. He was always there. So was Hubble, so was Kennedy. And obviously Bruce Lindsay. I mean, those guys, the main right-hand guys, were always around. They were always around.
Well, if Susan is your cup of tea for a confidant, more power to you, my friend.
I wouldn't tell her a goddamn thing, but these guys are a bunch of weirdos, so you never know.
Well, you read those notes, you find that even Marcia Scott, who was quite close to Vince.
Oh, no question.
And she says...
They used to...
Wait a minute. Now, Marcia says in her 302, or in the notes, rather, it didn't make it in the 302, she says, Vince was not the kind of person you have a heart-to-heart talk with in his office or anywhere else. Now, she probably knew him...
she knew
of all the women, she knew him really well.
She did. She knew him very well. But, anyway. Look, I got to run here.
Okay.
If you get that stuff, fax it over.
Okay.
All righty.
Yeah,
bye-bye.
So presumed Clinton antagonist David Bossie gives his endorsement to one more rationale for Vince Foster to murder himself. He was married to a hopelessly dependent, clinging Vine. It is a feminist's dream reason for a husband to kill himself. It is also the dream reason of a romantic rival, say, a girlfriend of the husband who fancies herself as just the opposite sort, one who doesn't busy herself with such demeaning things as baking cookies or giving teas. As we listen to this man, it is hard to believe that NBC News, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Clintons, and now Donald Trump could take him seriously. With David Bossie helping Trump, Hillary would seem to have little to worry about. Nevertheless, when he announced Bossie's appointment to the Washington Post, of all people, Trump described him as, quote, a friend of mine for years, solid, smart, loves politics, knows how to win, unquote. These words and this appointment could hardly be reassuring to Trump's supporters.